This happened several years ago. While it may not be as scary as some of the stories here, it was definitely one of the most terrifying, bizarre encounters I've ever had. I'm 33 and I live in the rural Midwest. I was born and raised in my hometown, and with the exception of a few months of living with my father on the East Coast, I've lived here my entire life. I've become pretty acquainted with the majority of the back roads in my area. One such road is an old highway that no longer has the traffic of days prior to the construction of the interstate that runs through the town. It's a long and winding road that offers gorgeous scenic views during the day and a quiet escape from the city at night. Along this road is a small lot with no more than 10 parking spaces, 2 picnic tables, and a single trash can. It's easy to miss due to the heavily wooded area surrounding it and the majority of the rest of the drive to it. And due to its secluded nature, it had played host to a fair share of teenage debauchery. I myself spent many a Friday night smoking away with my friends there. Needless to say, there were a lot of good memories attached to this place, and over the years, it's become one of my favorite spots to venture to when I need peace or solidarity. One night, about 5 years ago, my girlfriend and I are going through a rough patch. We had a big fight due to having to work early in the morning and her deciding to have a party full of her loud and intoxicated friends, and things escalated and I stormed out of the house and started driving towards my favorite spot. As soon as I was out of the city limits, I promptly cranked my angriest metal music and sped down the road, chain-smoking my menthols in an effort to calm down until I finally found the turnoff for the spot. I was happy to find no other cars in the lot, meaning that I wouldn't awkwardly stumble upon 2 lovers engaged in, the act. And I immediately jumped out of the car and sat down on one of the picnic tables, lit a cigarette, and stared at the stars. I sat there for several minutes until I decided to head back to the warmth of my car after hearing some rustling coming from the woods. Not wanting to become a chew toy for a coyote or an angry bobcat, I hustled back to my car and blared my music again, quickly forgetting the sounds that I had just heard. I decided to have one more smoke and then make my way home. I smoked it halfway through when, out of nowhere, I heard pounding coming from the passenger side of my car. I looked over to see a large hand beating against the window. I turned down my music that was still blasting, and as I did, I can hear a very angry voice shouting, "Open the door," while yanking on the door handle. Thankfully, my doors were locked, and after a few moments, the man disappeared from the passenger side and then reappeared out of the driver's side window while screaming and cursing at me to open the door. He was now punching my window trying to get in. I was frozen, in a mix of confusion and fear, but eventually snapped out of it and threw the car in reverse. It was so dark that I didn't get a good look at the guy, except for a split second he was illuminated by my headlights. He had a black zip-up hoodie with the hood up, a dark gray t-shirt and a ball cap. He was a stocky guy and had to be well over 6 feet as he towered over my Sonata. The only distinguishing feature that I could make out was a very large, dark beard. And I noped out of there real quick. I floored it across the parking lot and back towards the highway, and that's when I heard it. A loud bang that sounded like a gun. I slammed my foot on the pedal, took the first turn I could find, and once I was sure that no one was following me, I slowed down and realized that I was doing 90 on a gravel road. At the time, one of my best friends worked for a nearby gas station, so I made my way to tell him the whole story. We looked over my car thoroughly and found a couple of dents on top of the car and what looked like a boot print on my passenger door. We talked it over and ultimately decided to not call the police. It was a 20-minute drive to the location from the closest town. We were sure that the guy would most likely be gone by the time anyone got all the way out there. And yes, I realized that was probably ignorant of me in hindsight. I'm still baffled by this encounter. I don't know if this guy wanted to rob me, steal my car, or worse, but I'm glad that I made it home in one piece. A few years ago, while I was in college, I would deliver pizzas on my off days from school to make some extra cash. The shop I worked at was in a busy town. You would think the lunchtime shift would be worse than the dinner rush, but I made substantially more money delivering during lunch, mostly because it would usually be large businesses ordering pizzas for their company, and most of the time they would tip nicely. One afternoon, we got an order from some new insurance company that I had never heard of before, which for the record is not really a red flag. Once I started delivering pizzas to businesses during lunch, I found out that I didn't know most companies that I delivered to. And trust me when I say, a lot of these places could use some better marketing, but that's another story for another day. So, I took the order and plugged the address into my GPS. It wasn't far from the shop. The company had an office in a building that had been recently renovated, and right in the center of town was the small business park complex that was filled with old buildings and offices. It was only in the last few years that most of the spaces had been rented out. During the time the story took place, there was still a lot of available spaces in these buildings, and this wasn't the first time I delivered to this business complex, but it was the first time I delivered to this specific building of the complex. It was toward the back of the complex, and there was probably 10 cars in this massive parking lot. I walked inside the building, and I swear I felt like I was in an episode of The Walking Dead or something. It was just so creepy. It was quiet in a very desolate lobby. It had the vibe of an abandoned mall, and what made it more creepy was just the overall atmosphere of the interior of the building. It was dim inside, almost uncomfortably so. There wasn't a person in sight. The aesthetic of the place was all this tile that looked like it was supposed to be marble. There was eerie elevator music playing in the background that echoed slightly because of the lack of anything inside this big open space. And once inside, you walk into the center of the building and into a large atrium where you're able to look up and see all the floors. I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say the building was 6 floors. I looked at my order form and I couldn't read my own handwriting. I tried to recall, and I thought the woman on the phone said that it was on the 5th floor. I was purely guessing because the lobby didn't have any type of secretary or directory. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, still listening to the creepy elevator jazz that seems to be playing everywhere in this damn building. The elevator opened to a small walkway where I was able to look over the railing and down the atrium where I had just been standing a minute ago. I could go left or right out of the elevator, and both directions seemed to lead really nowhere. And by that I mean the halls were dark and I couldn't see any light protruding from the shut doors that lined the halls. Since I'm left-handed, I always opted to go left when I'm faced with these types of choices. A few steps down the hall, the lights above my head turned on and I felt a little relief. The lights in the hallway were motion censored, which made me feel better about the dark halls. However, I kept walking down the hall and every office appeared to be shut and vacant. After a minute or two, I decided to do what I should have done in the first place and just call the company that placed the order. It rang once, and then I hung up the phone because I heard someone shout, "Hey," from the end of the hall. I looked up, and a man with a sweatshirt was waving me down to an office at the end of the hall. He said in a very shaky voice, "Them pizzas for me?" And without thinking, I just nodded and said, "If you ordered 5 large pizzas, then I'm your guy." The man laughed and I started walking toward him. As I was getting closer to the guy, I noticed that the room behind him was completely dark. The door was cracked, but there was a small window on the side of the door and it appeared that the lights were off. I stopped about 6 feet away from the man and cautiously said, "Are you sure you ordered 5 pizzas? It looks pretty closed up behind you." The man nodded and said, Oh yeah, everyone is in the back conference room. I like to turn the lights off to save power." I tried not to judge a book by its cover, but this man did not give off the vibe that he sold insurance. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, and from what I could see in the shadows, his skin and teeth just looked disgusting. And against my better judgment, I followed him to the door, and when I was in the doorway, I knew I messed up. I looked inside the office and saw that it was empty and a completely vacant room. Before I could react, the man slammed the door in my face, knocking me and the pizzas over. I got up quickly, a little disoriented, and as I got to my feet, The man grabbed some 2x4 or some other large wooden piece from behind the door and just absolutely rocked me in the face with it. I was still conscious, but I was seeing stars for sure. I pretended to be unconscious, which I know may seem like a coward's move, but I didn't want that man to continue beating me, and I thought in the moment it was a good idea. I could not think straight, though. After all, I had no idea if the man had a weapon beyond that, or if there were other people inside that could potentially attack me if I started fighting back. While I was on the ground, the man starts to rummage through my stuff. He took my wallet, ripped off my gold chain from around my neck, and I could hear him running away. While on the ground, I could hear my phone vibrating from my left side. I must have dropped my phone when I dropped the pizzas. Otherwise, I'm sure this man could have taken that as well. I crawled over and grabbed my phone. It was the number that ordered the pizzas. I didn't answer it because I was convinced at this point that this was all some setup and that if I answered the phone, they would summon me to another part of the building where I would just get jumped again. I ended up staying on the ground and called the police, who did thankfully show up very quickly. While I was waiting, the number kept calling me, and I finally answered, and it was a kind young woman asking about the pizzas since they'd been waiting for about an hour at this point. I get the correct floor and office number from the woman, which was floor number 4, and went to the office with that police officer. As it turns out, this was a real office and a real order, and after a little initial investigation, it turns out the man who jumped me was just some homeless guy who was probably squatting in the empty offices. He saw me and just took an opportunity to strike instead of hiding. The bad news is, they never caught who did it. Unfortunately, this type of crime happens a lot in my hometown, and it's hard to determine who jumped someone based on a very little description and evidence. But there is good news, though. The company that placed the order felt so bad they ended up giving me a huge tip for my troubles. Not only that, but after the attack took place, the company installed a fob for the entrance and a security guard at the front door. And to my knowledge, this man was the last squatter that building ever had.
I don't get what goes inside the head of those people who mindlessly murder strangers, but what I do know is that I hate such people, and that is exactly the reason why I'm preparing to become an FBI agent. I want to catch all of them who dare to snatch families away from each other, just like that man did to mine that night. It was around the time when I was 7 and lived with my older brother Finn and our father. I don't remember our mom though. Neither did I know who she was, since no one talked about her. I remembered asking Father a few times, but he always gave a silent response or walked away before I could finish my question. So eventually I stopped asking him about her and continued to live in the dark. It was not like my life was bad in any way. No, despite not having a mother to nourish and care for me, I had the best childhood one could ask for. Dad provided us with everything, whether it was his time, food, toys, or adventures. It was Finn's 9th birthday when Father told us that we would be going on a camping trip on the beach near one of the hilltops in Florida. I remember feeling exhilarated, since I always loved it whenever Father took us on camping trips. Sleeping in tents and campfire stories, everything about it seemed to scream fun, so Finn and I started preparing for it right after. By preparing, I meant sneaking our toys into the bag, which were later discovered and taken out by Dad. After a long, boring 3-hour drive, we finally reached the beach. Unlike other camping trips where I had seen many other campers, this one seemed empty with no one in sight. But despite being the only people on the beach, nothing felt unusual to me, so I started playing with Finn. I did notice someone sneaking around when I was in the middle of a game, and it had been a few minutes I saw that figure who seemed to be disappearing every time I turned around. But thinking it might be an animal or another camper, I kind of shrugged it off and went back to playing with my brother, as our father nailed the tent into the sand. A few minutes after setting up the tent and starting the campfire, I saw a man who seemed to be around in his late 20s or early 30s walking in our direction. He was carrying an extremely dirty looking bag, which made it look like he must be hiking for days. Noticing my constant glance on him, he gave me a smile that showed his crooked teeth and walked directly to my father. He asked if he could get some water as he scanned him head to toe as if he was trying to figure out something. Although I was small at the time, I still could sense there was something off about this guy. I don't know if it was some sixth sense going off or something, but I didn't like it. So I rushed to my father and hid behind him. The man's expression flickered for a second at my action, but he went back to showing his crooked smile. Father asked the man to wait for a few minutes and went inside the tent, where he had put his bags to bring out a water bottle. Finn and I followed him inside when he whispered to us, "If anything goes wrong, you run to the east side of the beach and get help." I didn't understand why he said that at the time, but I figured he must be thinking the same thing as me, maybe a bit ahead of us. I remember him calling someone and whispering something that I don't remember at the time before heading out of the tent. The man waited patiently as the three of us exited the tent with a bottle of Papa's hand, which he handed to him. His smile had gone completely at this point, and he snatched the water bottle from Father's hand and gulped it in a single breath. He wiped the water from his mouth as he mumbled something under his breath before taking out a large knife from his bag. I don't remember the exact size of the thing, but it might be around 15 inches. He started coming closer to us, so Dad started shouting and warning him that he would regret doing anything. The man started to give a hysterical laugh, and even at that age, I could recognize the malice in his eyes, which was frightening. I remember that my brother and I started crying and shaking as we were utterly horrified by the situation. In front of our father, who had probably never even harmed a fly, he looked too big, so I started imagining the worst. I remember Father pushing me aside as the guy lunged towards us, and before he could protect Finn, the man had gotten a hold of him. "Put the boy down and deal with me, okay?" he said in a slow voice, trying to reason with the madman. "Shut up! Don't tell me what to do or I'll kill the kid!" The man shouted, which made us cry even louder. "Okay, fine, I won't say anything. Just tell me what you want," Father said in the same slow voice while putting both of his hands in the air. He turned to look at me and signaled something which I couldn't understand. "I want you to come closer," the man said in a demanding voice. "What?" Father asked in confusion. "Don't make me repeat myself, you shithead!" The man shouted again while piercing the knife on Finn's neck, which made a small cut. Father panicked and walked towards him, but as he did, the man stabbed him in the chest. And the only sound that escaped his throat, along with a painful groan, was, "Gwen, run." I screamed and ran as if I was waiting for his command, my snot and tears all over my face along with the hiccups that started to follow the flow of my crying sounds. I could still hear the painful screams of Finn and Father. The man was probably stabbing them, and I was going to be next after he was done with them. As I was running with my weak and small legs in the direction Father had instructed me, I bumped into someone on my way. I remembered looking up and watching two men in police uniforms who had just come out of their car after watching me run. "My father, Finn," I said along with hiccups, wiping my snot and tears. One of the policemen took me in the car, while the other went to where our tent was. I don't remember if they found the vicious man or not, but what I do remember is that they asked me if there was someone I could contact to inform them about my family. Later that day, when I was at the police station, Grandma came to pick me up, and her eyes were filled with tears. She embraced me in her arms while constantly saying, along with her apologies and muffled cries, "You poor thing." The very three words that have become triggers for my trauma.
I grew up in a place called Derry in Northern Ireland. You know that Norn Iron meme that's been going around? Hey, that's us. Anyway, I came up on a housing estate called Carn Hill. A wee bit rough, but generally an alright place to live. Carn Hill is basically like 9 or 10 little clusters of houses on like a ring road, but all with lovely green spaces between them. You could run about them, play football, just generally messing about, and most of the rest of the estates could see you, so your mom always knew someone was keeping an eye on you. Carnhill took a lot of guff from the British Army during the Troubles, so naturally we had a big IRA presence here too. And when the violence ended, not all the paramilitaries decided to give up the cause. Not only that, but younger lads who glorified all that bollocks wanted a piece of it too, and so they joined continuity organizations like the real IRA or Ogli Neherin to carry on the fight. But who do you fight when there's no British soldiers around no more? You can't really go around shooting the police because, as much as we don't like to admit it, they do keep us safe from mad Huns when it suits them. So, who do you go for? Who are the enemies of the community? If you're a real IRA man, the answer is obvious. You go after drug dealers. And an even bigger prize, you go after those that predatorize children. Historically speaking, the IRA used to do most of their punishment beatings or shootings in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. Seeing them be violent towards people who weren't outright Brits was bad PR, but after the continuity lot started targeting dealers and creeps, PR was a must-have. They wanted people to know that they were doing it, and they were proud of it. And what's most relevant to my story is that they wanted people to see it. So it's 2010, I'm 13, and I'm playing out with my friends during this lovely summer's evening. It's humid out, but with just the right amount of breeze, and I'm honestly dreading my mum calling me in for the night because I'm having such a good laugh. Normally she'd call me in, and I'd always manage to haggle a few more minutes out of her. It'd be this playful back and forth of 5 more minutes, Mom, please, and hey, go on then, but here, make sure you're no longer than 5. The bath's running for you, so it is. Only this time, my name gets called, and when I give my usual pushback, it's immediate, like, Selena, get your backside in here right now, young lady. My mom didn't shout, she barked it. And she was about to go through me for a shortcut, and I knew she most definitely wasn't kidding on. I say bye to my friends, then notice all their mums are coming out too, calling them inside. I was only 13, but I wasn't soft, and I quickly worked out that Mum was so agitated because 4 men had appeared on the green and were walking towards the wide open spot in the middle. As I reach my mom, she just tells me, "Go right up to your room and don't come out until I say." Now my bedroom faced the street out the front, and all the commotion was out the back, so I only half obeyed my mom by heading upstairs, but then creeping into my parents' bedroom at the back of the house so I could watch what was going on. As you just heard, the entire green was deserted except for 4 men. 2 were younger lads, 2 were a bit older. One of the older fellows had this terrified look on his face and was being flanked by the 2 young lads with their faces covered, who every so often had to kind of push him along like he was dragging his feet. It was clear he didn't want to be there, but I could only wonder as to what had him so spooked like that. Anyway, right when the 4 men reached the middle of the green, they stopped. The older one at the back, who also had his face covered and was obviously the fellow in charge, started shouting all this stuff that I didn't quite understand at first. But then it became clear that the man they had with them had done something really bad, and it dawned on me that they were about to publicly punish him for it. But then, just when my sympathy for the man had reached its peak, the fellas with their faces covered said one of the few things I actually really understood, that the man they were about to punish was someone who had touched a child. I think that might have gotten a gasp out of just about everyone in the estate, and it completely shifted the dynamic of what we were witnessing, because as much as what happened next was grim, I now understand that the real horror of what happened that day was that those men had the consent of the community to do what they did. Most people in Northern Ireland are tired of violence, but the vast majority of us, older and younger, just want to live our lives in peace. We've lived through more than 100 years of struggle, both north and south of the border, and if you can manage to elicit a bit of bloodlust from us, trust me, that's no mean feat. Then right before our eyes, the younger men forced their prisoner onto his stomach and held him in place while their leader took what looked like a gun out of one of his jacket pockets. Then bang. The man screamed like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was blood-curdling. I know that's cliched, but it's true. It was a sound I found myself physically recoiling from, and from what I understand, this first shot was to the back of the man's kneecap. Bang. Another shot, and another scream. The second sounded sadder than the first. I know that sounds weird, but it was more like a groan than a scream towards the end. Maybe he just didn't have the breath in his lungs anymore, who knows, but what's for certain is that this shot was to his other kneecap. He'd probably never walk properly again, not for the rest of his life, but I doubt that there was a single ounce of sympathy on their entire estate. I don't think they have flinched if they had blown his head off, but they didn't blow his head off. They shot something else off instead. Bang. Just when I thought I'd heard the most horrifying scream in my life, the third one tops it all. It was this undulating howl up and down and rasping at the end, that all you could hear was sobbing, this ugly sobbing as the masked men stood up and walked away. I don't really know what I was expecting to happen next. I mean, a man had just been shot 3 times. There could be little doubt that he was in danger of bleeding to death. You'd think someone in a good Christian community like ours would bother to check on him, regardless of the crime he'd been accused of. But no. It took half an hour for ambulance crews to reach us, and this isn't a place where the average response time is about 10 minutes. To me, that means people actually debated for a full 10 to 15 minutes whether or not they'd actually call for help for that guy. There were people on the estate who were happy to let the man die in front of their children that day, based on pure hearsay. Well, I say hearsay, but it did turn out to be true. The statement released by the PSNI condemned the way the man was attacked, but it didn't deny what he was. Lo and behold, the man, who will remain nameless here, was convicted of offenses just a year or so prior and had moved over to Derry to start a new life. The paramilitaries tracked him down and told him to leave, and when he refused, they came for him. There's a lot of people, both at the time and now, who tell me they don't care if that guy was shot, how he got exactly what he deserved. And if he couldn't properly walk again, oh well, it meant our kids would be a wee bit safer. But I don't want to live in a place where that kind of violence is on view to the public. Civilized societies deal with their criminals without violence and away from the innocent eyes of children. They shot that man because he abused children, but what's shooting someone in front of children, if not child abuse as well? I'm not trying to equate the two, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to think that monsters can only live on the fringes of society, and I don't think I could handle the realization that monsters are all around me, just pretending to be normal, regular people, when really, they're just as savage and brutal as those they profess to hate.